Well, I was super excited to learn today that the U.S. Department of Justice has launched a review and evaluation of the 1921 Race Massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That announcement was made by Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke. I saw Kristen Clarke in D.C. at the White House at the Juneteenth celebration, and we had a conversation about this. Now, of course, she couldn't tell me during that encounter what the Department of Justice was going to do, but she did say that the Department of Justice was committed to helping the families, the survivors, get justice in that case. So a couple of months later, we get this announcement from Kristen Clarke's office. We know that massacre happened on May 31st, that is 1921, when white attackers, a white mob, attacked as many as 300 people, most of them Black, in Tulsa's prosperous Greenwood neighborhood. The neighborhood gained the nickname Black Wall Street. So this is a huge decision by the Department of Justice, not only for the case in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but for reparations actions that are happening around this country. Because if the Department of Justice is willing to take on a case, to review it, to evaluate it, it means that other attorney generals in other states might be willing to do the same for those cases in their states. It means that other governmental entities might be encouraged to look differently at reparative justice and reparations actions. So after learning of this news, of course, I had an opportunity to talk with a good friend of mine. He's a fellow barrister. His name is Damario Solomon-Simmons. He has been the lead attorney fighting like crazy to get not only national attention for the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre, but also to get justice for the survivors in the court systems. He got some bad news. We all got bad news a couple of weeks ago when the Oklahoma Supreme Court denied appeals by Damario Solomon and his clients. But they say weeping may last for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Well, there's a little joy today because the Department of Justice has given a new light and allows this case to live for another day. Damario Solomon, welcome back to the show, Damario. Thank you so much for joining me in this hour. Well, we both, and I would say you in particular, got some really good news today out of the Department of Justice as Kristen Clarke, our Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, announced a review and evaluation of the 1921 Race Massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Help us understand what this means and why this is so significant.
Yeah, first of all, always good to see you, Areva, and thank you for having me on. This was an amazing revelation. That's something we've been pushing for almost 4 years. And obviously myself, working on trying to get justice and reparations for those who suffered the massacre and their descendants. And I've been working on this thing for over 25 years myself. Wow. But ever since the Biden-Harris administration went into office, we started reaching out to the Department of Justice and saying that, hey, you guys can open up a federal investigation. It's never happened, ever in the 100+ years of the massacre. And you have the right to do it through the Emmett Till cold case, Civil Rights Act. Civil Rights Crimes Act. And we're excited. I got a phone call Monday morning. Well, actually, I got an email last Friday afternoon saying, hey, are you available Monday morning? And Reba, you get these calls sometime. Federal government gives you a call, something's up. And so I was like, okay, is this going to be yay or nay? And then they called me Monday morning, 8:30. I happen to be in Atlanta, Georgia for some meetings. I get the call. I'm ecstatic. So I have to get on a plane to get back to Tulsa so I can have a press conference with the community, because this was truly a great win for the entire community and our entire people. Like you said, this helps reparations and racial justice issues all across this nation.
So Damario, take us back, because you and I know the facts well about what happened in 1921. But for those folks who maybe heard a little something, maybe, have heard other people tell the story, tell us, someone, like you said, that's been working on this for decades, tell us what happened in Tulsa in 1921 that has caused you to be working on this issue for so long.
Yeah, man, thank you for that question. I'm actually, to tell what happened, I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about Oklahoma as a haven for Black people. In the 1830s, Black people were part of the Trail of Tears when the United States marched the 5 tribes out of the Southeast United States. And about 35 to 40% of those people that were marching, they looked like us. Many of them were enslaved by the Creeks and the Cherokee, the Seminoles, the Choctaws, and the Chickasaws, and some were free. And then when they got their freedom in 1860.
Hold on a second for me, Damario. A lot of people might be shocked to learn that indigenous people were enslavers because, you know, again, when we think about indigenous people in this country and the way the narrative is often told, they were victims of, you know, white supremacy in the same way that African Americans were. But you're saying there were actually indigenous people who enslaved other indigenous people and Black people?
Absolutely. And I'll speak specifically about the Muskogee Creek Nation, which I'm a Muskogee Creek. Yeah, so they call these folks, these tribes, the 5 civilized tribes. That's what they used to call them. And they call them that because they adopted so much of European way of life, including plantation-style economies and the enslavement of people of African descent and people of dark skin within their own nations. You know, one of the things that people don't understand, Areva, is that people look like you and I were here in America when the Europeans got here. And that's very, very well documented. And because of that enslavement, and some of those members of those nations practiced chattel enslavement and plantations. And they brought that to what's Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma. In 1866, at the end of 1865, at the end of the Civil War, we know that in America, you got the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which ended enslavement, gave citizenship, and also gave the right to vote to Black people in America. But the Black people that was in the Indian Territory were outside the bounds of America. And so they had to have treaties of 1866, which my 4-time great-grandfather, Cal Minko, also known as Cal Tom, was one of the 5 individuals who signed that treaty of 1866, specifically Article 2, which ended enslavement in the Creek Nation. So for the next 40 years, Areva, you had a mass of Black people already in Indian Territory, living as free and independent individuals, serving as judges and light horsemen and lawyers and teachers, etc. So as the turn of the century was coming along, more and more Black people were wanting to come over to Oklahoma because it was a haven, a place to be. And that's why Oklahoma created the most all-Black towns in the history of this nation. One of those towns was called Greenwood, which was inside of the city of Tulsa, but it was its own community. And Greenwood was the most prosperous, the most well-organized Black community in the history of this country. I'm gonna say it again, the most prosperous, well-organized per capita in the history of this country.
And its height, how big was Greenwood? How many people lived there?
At its height, Greenwood had about 11,000 permanent residents, but at any time, you could have 15 to 20,000 people within Greenwood because, you know, like in New York, they call Manhattan a city. Well, Greenwood was the city to all these small Black towns that were surrounding it. So people came to Greenwood to work. They came to Greenwood to purchase their groceries. They came to Greenwood to have fun. They came to Greenwood to visit family members. So Greenwood was a bustling location, and it lasted from 1905 to 1921, but it really started to hit its stride around 1913, 1914, 1915, where you have more professionals per capita than any other Black professionals, lawyers, doctors, pharmacists. Go ahead.
I'm curious, Damario, where were these professionals getting their education? Did they have a university system there? Are these folks like getting educated in some other place and coming back to Greenwood?
It was a little bit of both. I mean, you had, because again, the Native American nations had been over in Indian Territory since the 1830s. So you had educational opportunities through those traditional routes, but you also had individuals coming from around the country because everybody is wanting to get to Oklahoma, particularly Greenwood, as the Black promised land. Mm-hmm. And so there was 3 things that really built Greenwood, really 4, that made it so appealing to people from around the country. Number 1 was a freedom mind state. People know that they could get here, they could be free, and they can kind of insulate themselves from white oppression as best you could in Jim Crow America. Number 2 was land ownership. People were very focused on owning land, developing land. Number 3 was education and wealth concentration. They valued education. They valued building up wealth. And number 4 was cooperative economics. It was all about building up the community. I mean, these people, they specifically and intentionally wanted to live away from the white community because they didn't want to deal with the hate. They also owned the most valuable land in Tulsa at the time. So the massacre, while it started with the bogus arrest of a black boy, a young black man named Dick Rowland, who was 19-year-old shoeshine boy, who was falsely accused of, guess what? Assaulting a white woman. Oh, shocker. Taken down to the county courthouse. And the Tulsa Tribune, which was the largest evening newspaper, said, have a lynching tonight. And about 2,000 white men, bloodthirsty white men.
Where'd they come from? Because Tulsa, you said, is 11,000 people, predominantly African American.
Greenwood was 11,000 people. Greenwood was inside of Tulsa. Tulsa had 100,000 people total.
Okay, so Greenwood is inside this larger city of Tulsa that was predominantly white. Tulsa's white, Greenwood's black. So these 2,000 people come in from Tulsa.
From Tulsa, 2,000 white men who want to kill, lynch, and brutalize Dick Rowland. And this is one of the reasons why, even though I didn't know any of this, I'm telling you until I went to college, and we could talk about that. Well, I'm so passionate, and I'm so proud to be from North Tulsa, from Greenwood, because these men organized themselves. Some of the richest black men in America, people like J.B. Stratford, multimillionaire in 1921, A.J. Smithman, multimillionaire, the Williams family, who owned the Dreamland Theater, which was a 750-seat theater, which was a world-renowned theater from around the world. They organized themselves to go down to the courthouse to protect Dick Rowland, who was just a shoeshine boy. Now, I say just a shoeshine boy because...
Just hold a second, Damario. How did the world... I mean, we got social media, we've got TV, radio, but we're talking 1921. How did these 2,000 white men... It almost sounds like, you know, how we populated Black Lives Matter movement on social media. But how in 1921, from the morning to the evening, to 2,000 white people even get the news about this young kid?
Hey, but that's a great question. Listen, you know, back then it was all about newspapers. And so we had two main newspapers in Tulsa at the time. You had the Tulsa World and you had the Tulsa Tribune. The Tulsa Tribune came out in the evening and they printed up a bunch of papers. And on the front page, it said to nab a Negro for attacking white girl. Then they put an editorial out. They ran another paper, put an editorial out to lynch a Negro tonight. And so these people started coming. And you know, you've seen the pictures. These folks come and they just as a frenzy, and they were calling for this man's death. And about 150 brothers went down to the courthouse. Now, many of these men, not only were they business owners, not only were they wealthy, not only were they landowners, but many of them were World War I veterans. Ooh. So they were not afraid of white people. They were not afraid to shoot white people. And they were not afraid to go and confront these white people. But they went down there not for violence. They went down there and they asked the sheriff, hey, we want to volunteer to protect the life of Dick Rowland. The sheriff said, no, I got it. And then he had some drunk white man in the crowd speaking to one of the men, OB man, we believe it was, who was a World War I veteran, and he owned a couple of grocery stores in Greenwood. He said, nigga, what you doing with that gun? Excuse my language, but that's what he said. And he said, give me that gun. He said, I'm not going to give you this gun. And he tried to take the gun from OB man. And a shot rang out. Now imagine this. Imagine this. It's hot. This is May 31st. It's hot here in Tulsa. It's 2,000 whites. It's 120 black men dressed to the nines with guns. You can just feel the tension just from me, just imagining in your mind. Then the shot rings out.
Where's law enforcement? I mean, again, it's not the law enforcement of today, but whatever the sheriff or would have been law enforcement in that time period, where were they?
Well, the sheriff was at the courthouse, at the jail. The police were part of the mob. They were part of the mob. So after the shots rang out, the black men in Greenwood retreated back into Greenwood. A couple people got hit. They retreated back into Greenwood, which we call, this was the Frisco track. So they went north of the Frisco tracks. And what did the police do? They deputized the mob of 2,000 white men. What did the sheriff do? They deputized these white men. They didn't just deputize them, they armed them. And they allowed them to go and loot the stores around Tulsa to get guns and ammunition. And there is a famous...
So hold on a second. So what was the purpose of this, you know, deputizing them to do what? Because the teenager is still held up in the jail, right?
deputized them to attack Greenwood. See, like I said, the reason I gave you all this backstory, like how we got here, these black people were prosperous. They owned the best land in Tulsa. This was something that the white community they wanted to take their land, period. And so they utilized this incident with Dick Rowland as the ruse. Oh, now we can go and teach these, as they said, quote unquote, uppity niggers. I'm just quoting you what they said during the time. This is not my words. These are their words. And we know that they were deputized because there was a famous NAACP field secretary named Walter White. You may have heard of Walter White. He looked like a white man. He was in Oklahoma just by happenstance investigating lynchings on behalf of the NAACP when this all popped off. Walter White, who was black, who looked like a white man, got deputized with the other white man. And he writes about this, that he's deputized. He said it was easier than I thought. All I had to do was give an oath that I would uphold the law, and I was deputized. And he said when it happened, the white man next to him turned to him and said, now I can kill any nigger I want, and the law is on my side.
And so now these deputies who've been given this authority by the law enforcement are let free, have free reign to go into Greenwood, not to look for Rowland, because Rowland is in the jail.
That's right.
So it's not a search mission.
No.
This is just a go and destroy and take and rob. But why burn it? If you want the land, why burn it down?
Well, see, that's a good question. But see, when they first tried to invade Greenwood, the black man had set up perimeter defenses, and they held these people off for about 12 hours. They were actually winning the battle. And then they brought in the National Guard. The National Guard comes in and they bring in their machine guns, and they were able to organize themselves and get to a point where they were at 5 o'clock the next morning, which is June 1st. A whistle was blown and the white men attacked. They were able to cut down the defenses. And once they poured into Greenwood, they looted and robbed all of the valuables of Greenwood. Then they destroyed and burnt everything to the ground. We're talking over 1,550 homes and businesses destroyed. We're talking over 8,000 people made homeless overnight. Over 3,000 people disappeared, never to be heard from again. We don't know if they were murdered. We don't know what happened to them. We just know that they were there on May 30th and they were not there on June 1st, and we don't know where they are. This is the atrocity that we're talking about. Over 38 city blocks burnt to the ground. It is the largest crime scene in the history of this country. It is the worst race massacre in the modern American history. This is what the massacre is. And here's the deal. Why this
hold that thought for a minute, Damario. What an interesting story. Let's fast forward, Damario, to your survivors, the plaintiffs that you represented in a lawsuit, a public nuisance lawsuit that you filed against the city of Tulsa. I remember that when you started this action, there were actually 3 living survivors of that massacre. But by the time the Supreme Court determined that the lawsuit wouldn't move forward, you had lost some of those survivors. Talk to us about who they were and what the status of your survivor class is now.
Yeah, thank you for it. Absolutely. I do want to say one thing. At the height of the massacre, according to the Oklahoma National Guard, not according to Damario Solomon-Simmons, there was over 25,000 whites participating in the massacre, according to the National Guard.
25,000?
25,000.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yes. And so over the years, I've had opportunity to work with many survivors. But at the time of the lawsuit we filed, which was September 1, 2020, we had 3 living survivors. That was 110-year-old Mother Viola Ford Fletcher, now 109-year-old Mother Leslie Benefield Randall, who will be 110 in November 10th. And we had Uncle Red Hughes Van Ellis, who was the baby brother of Mother Fletcher. He was 102 years old when he passed away October 10th. And that was a real devastating blow for us because Uncle Red was such a, you met him, you knew him, you saw him. He was such a magnificent person. He had so much life and he was so invigorated in this fight. He was a World War II combat veteran. He raised, I think it was 7 or 8 children by working literally 6.5 days a week for decades. He was someone that felt very strongly that justice for Greenwood meant justice for Black people throughout this country. He understood, as he talked about, because of what happened in the massacre, he and his sisters, they didn't get an opportunity to get good education because they were run out of Tulsa and moved to a very small country town called Claremore, or actually east of Claremore at the time. And I was living out there, literally living in a tent. Went from a house inside of a bustling Black city to living as a tent. Now, he was Uncle Red he was an infant at the time of the massacre, but this is what his family experienced. And so to lose him was a big blow. And obviously, as you alluded to, last July 2023, our trial court dismissed our case. After the previous year, as you know, Areva, in May of 2022, she said we could move forward with our case. Then she comes back and dismisses our case a year later. We go through the Oklahoma Supreme Court process. They accept the case, which was a great victory for us. They set oral hearings or argument, which I was very fortunate to give. I had never, I've been practicing law 20 years this year. I had never argued at the Oklahoma Supreme Court, and that was our first argument, and it went fantastic. We felt really, really good about our chances, but unfortunately, we lost 8-1, and then we filed for a petition for rehearing, basically saying, "Hey guys, you got this wrong. Why don't you give us another opportunity?" And just a couple of weeks ago, they denied that. So that phase of that litigation was over with. But we
Let me ask you this, Damario, about the plaintiffs, though. So you told us about those 3 extraordinary African Americans, but you also talked about the thousands of people whose lives were impacted. How is it that just those 3 ended up being the plaintiffs in the lawsuit?
Well, because that particular lawsuit was a public nuisance lawsuit, which Oklahoma is one of a handful of states around the country that you can bring these public nuisance type actions. And so really they were there standing in the shoes of the community, because the public nuisance is for the area of the community that was destroyed or that's suffering the nuisance. And we're asking for abatement, which means to fix it. And so while they're obviously were the best plaintiffs because they were living survivors, the public nuisance litigation was for the entire Greenwood community. And the way we pled it, we believe that it was appropriate to say the remedies should extend even beyond the Greenwood community, because the damage was beyond the Greenwood community, even though the remedy needed to be tied to the Greenwood community. So when we talked about scholarships and victim compensation funds, things of that nature, we wanted to have a mechanism where people that was not even living in Tulsa anymore could have an opportunity to participate. Obviously, that was thrown out of our case early on. The court said we couldn't do that. We said, fine, we'll continue to move forward.
Let me ask you this. I'm sorry, I should have asked you before, but I think this is important to the story. The city's burned down, like you said, the homes and businesses are robbed. What ultimately became of that community? Was it rebuilt? Did it become a bustling Black community all over again? Did the white Tulsa community take the property? Like, what happened to people? Just because you burned my house down doesn't mean you now own my land.
Well, kind of all of the above. There were definitely land takings that were taken and the white community still owns today. So that did happen. There were some people that were fortunate to rebuild some semblance of what they had before. And then there were some people that just was either killed or run out of town, like J.B. Stratford, attorney J.B. Stratford, who was the richest man in Greenwood at the time. He owned the Stratford Hotel, which was the largest African-American owned hotel in the nation at the time. Burnt down to the ground. They charged him with the massacre. They said he was the cause of it, ran him out of town. He had to go to Chicago. He could never come back to Tulsa because he had a warrant out for his arrest from 1921 to 2007. I'm gonna say that again. He had a warrant out for his arrest from 1921 to 2007. You got A.J. Smitherman, another lawyer, but he was the editor-in-chief and owner of the Tulsa Star newspaper, which was the first African-American owned newspaper to have a national circulation. Again, burnt down to the ground. He was ran out of town, first to Boston, Massachusetts, and then he was relocated to Buffalo, New York. He was so afraid that they would come and get him that he got to Buffalo, New York, so he could get close to Canada if he needed to do so. And so those individuals couldn't rebuild. Now, a lot of Tulsa was able to come, Greenwood was able to come back somewhat, become another bustling community in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. And then what happened? Urban development, which is very
But when
similar.
it came back in the 30s and 40s, was it predominantly Black still?
It was predominantly Black. It was
Okay.
predominantly Black, definitely predominantly Black. And just like your clients out in Palm Springs, I think it's the Palm Springs 14, Section 14 is your clear case. Urban renewal came in. We call it Negro removal here. And they came in and they committed a second massacre. They came in and took what they wanted. They moved the Black community further away from downtown, further north. And then they put in I-244, which was very common around this country, to put in the highway. People don't understand these highways were put in. Number one, they destroy Black communities. They take hundreds of pieces of property, but they also will create a physical barrier to continually segregate the Black community behind this concrete barrier. Now, in today's world, because we have so much fluidity, we can move around so easy, technology, we don't understand how powerful of a symbol it was in the 50s and the 60s. They had this huge highway come in and imprison you. Now I've destroyed your businesses. I've taken your land. I put you behind this highway. And now what's going to happen? You're just going to slowly suffer and die out on the vine. And that's what happened to Greenwood. By 1980, Greenwood was pretty much no more. Mm-hmm. It was a shell of itself. Property ran down. Now you got gentrification. So now today, fast forward to today, Greenwood is built up. Greenwood is beautiful. Greenwood has big office buildings and high rises and banks and hotels.
Okay, but who lives there? Is it predominantly Black?
It is white.
Wow.
Everything that I've described to you, as far as the business district of Greenwood, is white owned. The banks, the office buildings, the hotels, the event centers, the restaurants. There is not one piece of property on the old business district of Greenwood that is Black owned besides Vernon AME Church, which is one of the surviving churches, Mount Zion Church, which is another surviving church, and then you have what we call the Greenwood Cultural Center, which is a Black institution that was built in the mid 1990s because of we had two fantastic local legislators, Representative Don Ross, and Senator Maxine Horner, who's no longer with us, made that happen. But the thing about that is the city owns the land. They own the building, but the city owns the land and they lease it back to the cultural center, on a long-term lease. They put a University of Oklahoma State University, Tulsa. They put that in Greenwood. And so it is what I always say. Yeah, you happy about Greenwood now. Yeah, you want to tell the story about Greenwood now. Yeah, you're excited about people coming to Greenwood for tourism because you own everything.
Yeah. There was hope, and there is still hope. A ram in a bush, I would call it.
Yeah.
That's Attorney General Kristen Clarke. Talk to us about this news today that the Department of Justice has launched a review and evaluation of the race massacre.
Yeah, we were very thankful to Kristen Clarke, who's been a long time, fighter for justice and civil rights and a friend that we've all known. But hey, she works for the Department of Justice, and we had to go through that process. I mean, I had so many meetings with her and her staff. We sent so many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pages of documents to her, and we kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And finally, they're going to open what they're calling a review and evaluation. They made it very clear that they don't anticipate that they're going to be able to prosecute anyone because they don't think anyone is still living. But here's the deal, Areva, and I want everybody to hear this. We firmly believe strongly that the corporations that participated in the massacre, participated in the mayhem, the murder, and participated in the cover-up, the conspiracy to cover up the murders, they should be prosecuted. And so we will be pushing and doing everything we can to provide additional information to the Department of Justice. We're calling on anyone that's listening, that you think you may have information or documents that may be helpful, that the Department of Justice needs to hear or see. Reach out to us at justiceforgreenwood.org. That's justiceforgreenwood.org, justiceforgreenwood.org. We're going to be working with our descendant communities throughout the country. We have one of our largest descendant communities is Southern California. We also have Kansas City, Chicago, the DFW area, etc. But if you're listening right now and you're in Southern California and you are part of the Justice for Greenwood network, or you think maybe your family was involved in the massacre, or you know of someone who may have had a family member, please reach out with us, because what we've been told, Areva, is that over the next 90 days, they're going to do this evaluation and review, and they're going to produce a report by the end of the year. So we're talking about 90 days.
Yeah, let me ask you this. So you talked about corporations that you say were involved, complicit in some way. Do you have the names of those corporations?
Yes.
And were these corporations that were in Greenwood or in Tulsa? And give us an example of what some of these corporations look like.
Sure. I'll give you the Tulsa Regional Chamber of Commerce.
Mm-hmm.
Tulsa Regional Chamber of Commerce, their members participated in the massacre. We know that for a fact. And then after the massacre, it was the Tulsa Regional Chamber of Commerce that put together what they called at the time, not my words, intern camps and concentration camps, where they held the Black survivors in these camps for up to a year. And wow. they gave these individuals green badges that they had to wear. And many of them could not leave unless they were signed out by a white person. And then they enslaved them and forced them to clean up the wreckage without pay. That is slavery. The chamber.
And what authority did they have to incarcerate? Were these individuals tried? Was there a trial or of some sort where they were, convicted by their peers for some crimes and then sentenced to this
martial law was declared. The city of Tulsa put together what they call the Public Welfare Board, which was run by the chamber, and the chamber set this up. They first came out and said, hey, we're sorry about this. We're going to do everything to rebuild Greenwood. But then they realized, this is a big embarrassment. We can't let the world know what actually happened. So they tried to cover it up. And in fact, Areva, get this. People from around the nation who heard about this, particularly Black community, they were sending money in to the Greenwood survivors. The chamber was keeping the money.
Wow.
Or sending the money back. This is all documented information. You have the chamber. You have the city of Tulsa itself.
So who declared this martial law? Was that the city or the governor? Or?
The governor declared the martial law based upon what was happening.
Under this martial law, this Chamber of Commerce was empowered to pick someone off the street and say, come here, I'm going to put you in this internment camp?
I don't know if they were empowered. They did it. And they kept them there. And then it was the chamber along with the city. So in Oklahoma, I don't know how it is in California, but in Oklahoma, cities are corporations, municipal corporations. There are also other corporations like the Sinclair Oil Company that utilize their planes to drop bombs on the community of Greenwood. Tulsa is the first location in America to have bombs dropped from the sky. In fact, many people don't realize that the Gap Band is from Tulsa. That means Greenwood, Archer, and Pine Band, which is the three main streets of Greenwood. And that particular song, You Dropped a Bomb on Me, is about the massacre.
Wow. I didn't know.
The Gap Band, You Dropped a Bomb on Me, is about the massacre. And so these organizations, also, what about the insurance companies who conspired with the city and the county and the state not to pay their insurance claims? Some insurance companies that are today still in operations, like Chubb, like AIG, like the Hartford. These are organizations that we've identified that refuse to pay their insurance claims because the city and the state wrongfully and unjustly labeled this a riot.
So back to Kristen Clarke in the Department of Justice. They're going to do this review and evaluation. They've told you there are no individuals still living that could be prosecuted for the murders. And you say, well, okay, they're not individuals, but there are these corporations, you've just named a list of them, that can be prosecuted because of their conspiracy, because of their complicity, because of the actions that they took to harm, to murder, to,
well, murder, we
prison
understand.
these people.
Yeah, the statute of limitations on everything is run except for murder, right? So we know people were murdered, and we know there was a conspiracy of silence. We know that, in fact, right now, Reva, they're digging up the mass graves that they denied existed for 80 plus years. We fought on that forever. They finally agreed that they do exist. Then they dug up folks, and now they're actually able to identify some of the individuals that were killed in the mass graves. This is just happening right now, real time.
Yeah, no, we are out of time, Damario. This story, every time I hear you tell it, it gets more and more interesting. We learn more and more facts about this atrocity. Thank you so much again for your work, for your diligence on this. We're going to be watching very carefully what happens over the next 90 days and hoping that the Department of Justice provides some modicum of justice because the court systems refuse to do so. Again, Damario Solomon-Simmons representing survivors of that horrific massacre in Greenwood, Oklahoma, 1921.